Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. We are in the Super Trade round, round 16, and massive news that we need to get through. Nathan Cleary, one of probably the best SuperCoach player for the season so far. He's gone down with injury. We've got Tafita Pangai Jr. suspended. We've got 5 trades to use. There's so much stuff that we need to be thinking about. So there's a lot to tune into. So as always, if you do appreciate the video, always really appreciate a thumbs up on the video, and do please consider subscribing to the channel as well already if you haven't done so, as I'll put more videos out throughout the 2021 SuperCoach season. We're in the latter half of the season, so things are really starting to get exciting as we fine-tune our teams. So let's get straight into it. So we'll start off with a quick kind of, general strategy around how many trades should we be using this week. I did put a video out earlier on the weekend, just giving my general thoughts on my team. A lot of that information though has been outdated given all the news that we've heard. But in my opinion, I think it really depends on how many trades you've used up until this point. It's really kind of obvious, but I think if you've max traded up until this point, hopefully your team's in a bit of a better state than say some other teams. So I don't really know if you need to use all 5 trades. It's really up to each team. For example, I've got 13 trades left, so I've saved a few so far this season. So I'm still planning to maybe try to do 3 to 4 this round. Just keep at least 1 or 2 if I can, just to save in this round. Just given that with all the carnage and the suspensions, etc., towards the back end of the season, I think trades are so precious. And as we'll get onto Nathan Cleary as well, I think a lot of people might have a lot of money available to do the big upgrades that they wanted to do. So cash might not be as much of an issue anymore. So I think you don't have to use as many trades to get towards your final team now. So I think it is a bit easier to potentially only use, say, 3 to 4 trades. That's my general guideline. But obviously I know a lot of people, including myself, have toyed with using the 5 trades. I haven't fully decided yet myself as well, but that's just some general advice. We'll do a bit of a quick Team List Tuesday wrap up up until this point. I think all the big news has really been covered, but we'll just quickly go through the highlights. The main ones out of the Rooster Storm, which is coming up tomorrow night on Thursday, is that a lot of the Origin guys will be backing up. So Tedesco, Angus Crichton have been named, and apparently went through the captain's run today. All good, so they should be fine to play. But obviously playing on the Thursday, we will be able to get access to that final team list before we have to lock in any of our changes. On the Storm side, Cam Munster and Christian Bolch are both named to back up as well. Sam Walker is an inclusion for the Roosters as well, which is a big in for them. Nico Hines is also still named at fullback. Big exclusion is that Ryan Pappenhausen potentially was supposed to be coming back in round 16. Now it's looking like round 18, so the round after the bye week is when he's tipped to come back, although there have been some other reports about round 20, but definitely Nico Hines is locked in for this week. Out of the Warriors and Dragons, some news here is that Chad Townsend has made that switch over for the rest of the season for the Warriors. So has Dalmotani-Zelezniak. Josh Maguire and Tura Fromiono are new players to come back into the Dragon side after their lengthy suspensions. In terms of key outs, it's mainly out of the Warriors. You've got Josh Curran, unfortunately, which is really frustrating for my own team. He was he was a close contact on a flight, so he's had to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Him and Ewan Aiken, actually, sorry, I haven't got his name there. They've both had to, self-isolate. Apparently, they've both tested negative, but they still have to quarantine for 14 days. And on the 14th day, when they actually get out, is the game day for the Warriors. And it's been reported that it's highly unlikely that they're going to play. So, in my opinion, I don't see Curran actually playing in round 17, which is really frustrating. As someone who held him for that. And Reece Walsh has also not been named by the Warriors, as he's nursing that bit of some hamstring tightness that ruled him out of the State of Origin game 2. And hopefully also an owner of him, that trade has not worked out. Brought him in hoping for some big points against the Knights, cover round 17, and now I don't know if he's going to do either, but we'll live with the decision. Panthers and Eels on the Friday. I must say there are actually some quite good games coming on this during this round. Most of the Origin guys are backing up for the Panthers. We've got Luai, To'o, Capewell, Yo, not Origin but Kikau has been named as well. Brett Naden is actually making his first game of the season actually. Mike Asiva also returns for the Eels. The big out for them is obviously Nathan Cleary, and that's the biggest talking point of the round by far, and we will get onto him just in a little bit. And Dylan Edwards is also out, so Charlie Staines is actually named at fullback. So if anyone's still holding on to Charlie Staines, I wouldn't probably be looking to trade him out, because you might want to see how he goes at fullback. And there was one game, I can't remember which one it was, but he's played like 10-15 minutes at fullback and he looked quite good. So he could actually still be a decent hold, I think, if he's still hanging around your teams. Bulldogs and Manly on Saturday. The main news here is that Tom Trbojevic has been named to play. Obviously, there's no confirmation yet up until the final team list whether he's actually going to be playing, but it's a 6-day turnaround, so I've got a feeling that he will play. And for more reports, that little ankle or whatever issue it was that he got in Origin 2 wasn't too major. The big out for them is Josh Schuster still hasn't been named, which is really, really concerning as someone who's held on to him, hoping for round 17 coverage. There was no reports actually of whether he's actually going to be available next week as well. The early reports that I saw were around 16, so I thought he was going to be back this week, but he wasn't even named on the extended bench, so I'm a little bit concerned. I don't think I'm going to trade him out this week. I think I can hold on to that for one more week. If he's not named next round, though, I probably would punt him on at that point in time. On the Bulldog side, look, there's been a lot of controversy around, a lot of their players being close contacts of COVID as well in Bondi. There's too many changes of the Bulldogs to report on. There's just half the team has basically been changed. The Raiders and the Titans, again, some changes, well, not some big inclusions here, is that Dave Fafita, Tino, Moto Fodawaker, AJ Brimson has also been named for them. So they're all backing up from Origin. Obviously, Brimson didn't play in Origin, but he's back into the team. And Jared Croker, the Matt Tomoka cheapie killer, basically has come back into the Raiders lineup at centre, and Sebastian Chris has moved to the other side, taking Tomoka's place. So yeah, big out in terms of, a round 17 cheapie that a lot of us were pinning our hopes on. And same with Greg Marzu, not necessarily a round 17 player, but some cheapie that a lot of not some cheapie, a cheapie that a lot of people got on. He made quite a bit of money. He actually had decent points, I think, in that game against Manly, but he's out with an elbow injury. And Corey Thompson is actually back into the wing. I should have written his name here as well. That's a big in for the Titans. The Knights and the Cowboys, the big news here is that Kalen Ponga has been named back for them. Some reports that apparently he's been training the house down, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, big in for the Knights. And Val Holmes has been named to back up for the Cowboys. Out of the Broncos and the Sharks, the big ins here is that Tony Staggs has been named at centre. Definitely an interesting proposition to keep an eye on. I wouldn't be jumping on him straight away. But Tony Staggs, I had him through periods last season, and we saw what he can do. He's got some amazing individual brilliance, and he's been named at centre, which is good because there was some talk that he would potentially be playing at the 5'8" position for the Broncos. Obviously, that might change. They seem to change their halves combination every fortnight. So we'll see if Tony Staggs ends up in 5'8", but yeah, big in for the Broncos. And Jermaine Sarko also finds himself on the wing. In terms of the out, it's Tavita Pangai Jr. He's been suspended for, I think, 3 weeks. So yeah, a big out for them. Out of the Tigers and the Rabbitohs, the last game on Sunday, Adam Dewey and Benji Marshall are both big ins for their respective teams. For a quick second there, I thought Benji Marshall was an in for the Tigers. Throwback, eh? And not really too many outs, I guess, to report out of that. And on the Eels, I've got Eels Bulldogs written there. Ignore that, that's just a typo. But yeah, Mike Asiva is back for the Parramatta Eels. So the big topic of the week is Nathan Cleary. I kind of wanted to record on Wednesday because the reports were that he was going to see the shoulder specialist today and we get some more concrete news. So I didn't want to do it on Tuesday and not have that information or have it be up in the air. We have got some better news that he doesn't need that surgery, which would have ruled him out for the rest of the season. And so instead, his recovery time frame is looking more like 3 to 6 weeks of rehab, and they'll just kind of rehab and manage his shoulder throughout the rest of the season, which to me makes sense. I think the Panthers are in prime position to potentially win a premiership, and I think they will do everything they can to make sure that Cleary stays in the team. And so I think they'll just delay that surgery to the back end of the season. What that does potentially mean, though, is that in this whole rehab recovery process, is that I feel like they're really going to make sure that he's as fit and firing for the finals as they can be. So they're not going to, I think, call upon him if they need to. So I put a bit of a time frame here as to kind of the next few weeks and what they look like for the Panthers. I mean, this week was against the Eels. He was going to miss round 17 anyway because he would have been involved in State of Origin. And round 18 was I think 2 days after the State of Origin Game 3. So likely Cleary probably wasn't going to play that game anyway. So that's the 3 weeks that we'd probably expect him to miss. Now, it gets really interesting, though, when it gets to the 4th week, which would be against the Broncos, or kind of like that 3.5 to 4 week range. That would be, based on the current report, the first or earliest time that he would be expected to come back. I mean, the Broncos is obviously, if you had Nathan Cleary against the Broncos, that's prime captain material, he could go massive. But will he come back for that game? I'm not quite sure. It's a pretty easy game for the Panthers. I'd expect them to win, even with Burton and Luai as the halves. And so I don't know whether they would rush him back. I feel like the Melbourne Storm game, though, a big clash against probably likely, they're most likely their grand final opponent for 2021 as well. I feel like that's when they might want to potentially get him back. So rest him for the next month, given that that's towards the earliest stage of his recovery, and then potentially get him ready for that Melbourne Storm game. If not, then they've got the Roosters, which again is a big game, and well, not quite as big as the Melbourne Storm, but still pretty decent. And that would be pushing it now towards the 5 to 6 week period where he's more likely to come back. Now, just looking at that price, 1.06 million, he's almost 1.1 million, which is ridiculous. Super high break even, although I think in this instance we can kind of ignore the break even. The way that I see it with Cleary is that, in my opinion, I think he's a sell. I think with that first potential game of him coming back, like in my own head, is the Melbourne Storm, and that's in round 20. There's 4 rounds in between. That's 1 month of holding on to a guy who's $1.1 million. I mean, if you cash him out, there's so much that you can do with that money. As I mentioned at the top of the video, you can trade him out and you can downgrade to like the next best halfback, which is like a Jerome Hughes. And I think that creates like 450k. It's crazy how much. And with that 450k, you can upgrade one of your, Spencer Leniu, Stefano, or Tikumanu to like a premium gun position in that position. There's so much that you can do with that money, and I really think it also depends what kind of format of the game that you play. So I'm mainly focused on overall, and 4 weeks of not having Cleary, I think that's too much of a time for me to, that's a lot of points that you'd be missing out on when you can, use this cash, bring in some other gun players who can still score some points in that time. If you're a head-to-head player, when your overall, obviously you're not as focused on that, towards the back end of the season, having Nathan Cleary as a bit of a point of difference to a lot of your opponents could be huge, and so there's probably more reason for you to hold on if you're more focused on head-to-head, but if you're overall, in my opinion, I think he's a sell, and that's kind of the reasoning. I think is I just don't know whether they would want to risk him against the Broncos. Even then, when he does come back, they might manage him throughout the season. Will he be back to his best? There's a lot of question marks, and I think we've seen so far this season that whenever these kind of things have propped up, so say with like a like with James Tedesco initially in the beginning of the season, when we saw all of his star players like Luke Keary, etc., fall away around him, that really limited his upside. And since then, Tedesco hasn't really quite hit those heights. The first couple of weeks he was scoring 160, 110, 15, and since then I think he's only really gone over 100, I think once in that time. We saw with Ryan Pappenhausen when he got that his first injury, a lot of people kept holding him because it was like, it's going to be this week, it's going to be this week, and it just went on and on and on and on. And those people just held all his money, and if they didn't switch to like a Turbo or a Gutho, they really lost out on the points. And I think with the way that there's so many big swings in points with rounds, I think you really probably need to, if you're an overall, I think capitalize on that cash. He's at basically peak price. We've never seen a price like this before in SuperCoach. So, you can create so much extra value around the rest of your team by trading him out. So I think there's more pros to trading him out, in my opinion, than cons. And so after that spiel, who do we trade him out to? There's a wealth of halfback options that we could go to. I'll put a few guys down below there, like Jerome Hughes, Sam Walker, Cody Nikorima, Sean Johnson, Ben Hunt, Matt Burton, and Daly Cherry Evans. I think those 7 are probably really the pick of the bunch in terms of a halfback replacement. And in that, I think there's only a few guys that people are going to be more realistically, I think, looking at. So we'll just take a look at that now. So what I've got here, this is from NRL SuperCoach stats. It's just a bit of a run through on the scores and the opponents that the key kind of halfback replacements have had so far during the season, and also their upcoming draw. Now, I've narrowed it down to 5. Jerome Hughes, Sam Walker, Cody Nikorima, Sean Johnson, and Ben Hunt. I will just quickly mention with Ben Hunt, I think he's probably better actually in the hooker position, given how much lack of depth there is in that hooker position. I think Ben Hunt, if you did want to bring him in, I would find a way to try bring him in at hooker instead of halfback, because I think there are probably going to be better options at halfback. And so I think the main 4, would be Hughes, Walker, Nikorima, and Johnson. So we'll start off with Jerome Hughes, definitely the next best halfback in terms of average. I think his average is around 74.9. And as you can see there throughout the season, he's got that potential to go really, really big in terms of his scores. That's 4 scores, he's actually scored over 100. And one of them was against the Rabbitohs and one was against the Roosters. So he's able to get it done in the tougher games as well. And the Storm are absolutely flying. And you can see there, the past month, 4 or 5 weeks have been really, really good for him. His lowest score was a 63, which is at halfback, pretty amazing. The disadvantage to Hughes is that he doesn't play round 17. That's the obvious one. And even the draw for the Storm after round 17 is a bit of a mixed bag, because they've got Penrith in round 20. Potentially Cleary might be back, so you'd expect that to almost be back to full strength. But actually looking at it again, it's actually not that bad, because the next tough game after that is the Eels. And to be honest, the way the Storm are going, they could crush anyone 40 points to zip probably. So actually, I'd probably take the draw factor out of that a little bit with Hughes. And at 649k, as I mentioned, you can create like 450k trading Cleary to Hughes. He's got a break even of 45, so very, very achievable this round. So I think it's a good week to jump on him. He's probably going to be at the lower end of his price you'd expect. And I think he is the most popular replacement for Cleary, which to me, it makes perfect sense. He probably is the next best option. I just don't like that he doesn't cover round 17. So I think if you're an overall player who didn't do so well in the round 13 buy, I think you'd probably be trying to prioritize potentially a round 17 player. So the next three guys are round 17 players. We've got Sam Walker, who I think is also averaging around 72, 73. He's gone off the boil a little bit in the past few weeks. Obviously, he's been battling some shoulder injuries. But the start of the season, obviously, he was killing it. He had 81, 89, a low score of 21 against the Storm, which is a tough opponent. But then he went massive, in those 125 games and 163-point games against the Dragons and the Knights. So we definitely know he's got that big upside. I am just a little bit concerned. Obviously, this week coming up against the Storm, I don't really expect him to do too well. Round 17, though, is a fantastic game against the Bulldogs. So I think there's obviously a lot of points on offer here. I am just a little bit concerned. I think the Roosters overall, yes, they're getting a few players back, but I don't think they're quite the same, team that we've seen over the past couple of seasons. And just looking at that draw, it's a bit of a mixed bag. They're either versus really easy guys or they're versus really tough guys. Because you've obviously got the Storm this week, Bulldogs, Cowboys, Knights. The 3 weeks after that is really, really strong. Then you've got Para and Penrith back-to-back, which is pretty tough fortnight. Then it goes Broncos, Dragons, Rabbitohs, and Raiders. So a bit of a mixed bag again. So I just don't know how well he might go, given that in the past 4 weeks that he's played, he hasn't really done super well. His high score is 69. And also, I'm just a little bit concerned about his shoulder. They've obviously shown that they will rest him whenever they get the opportunity to do so. So that does give me a little bit of concern. So I don't actually think I'd be going to Sam Walker. And he's also got a pretty high break even of 106. Obviously, I think if you're trading out Cleary, you'd want to do it this week. Which is a bit of a disadvantage to getting on Sam Walker, but he could be a lot more cheaper next week. So potentially, if you're able to delay the trade to next week, you could maybe do it next week and gain even a little bit more money out of Sam Walker. I think the two guys that most people, I think, for round 17 coverage will be looking at is Cody Nikorima and Shaun Johnson. I did a bit of a section last week discussing these two, so I'll link that video as well in the description below if you're interested in hearing my thoughts. My general thoughts were that I think Shaun Johnson is going to be a bit more of that kind of consistent, 60 to 70 averaging guy who doesn't really have that much of a ceiling. He hasn't cracked the ton so far this season. Obviously, he's only just played a handful of games coming back from his injury. But even last season, his highest, he only had one score over 100, but he had most of his scores in the 60s and 70s. So he's a very, very solid, consistent option. He goal kicks as well, which is really, really handy. And the Sharks draw, in my opinion, is better than the Warriors draw. The toughest game that they've got basically for the rest of the season is the Storm, and that's in round 25. The Storm typically sometimes do rest a lot of their big gun players, so that game might not even be that tough. And he's versing the Broncos this week, which, as we know, is the team that basically concedes the most points. So I think Shaun Johnson is a great trade-in. And doing Nathan Cleary to Shaun Johnson is like 550k profit, which is just ridiculous to think about. So I really, really like Shaun Johnson as a trade-in. Compared to, say, Cody Nikorima, he's obviously got a little bit more, time on the field so far this season, and he was a bit inconsistent towards the beginning with, scores in the 70s, 30s. Then he cracked a century, back to 30s, and another century. But then he was very, very, very consistent in the past, 4 to 6 weeks. 95, 66, 69, 61, 73, 50. So no real horrible low scores. The draw for them is a little bit tougher than the Sharks, but not by much, to be honest. I mean, it's only because they've really got that game against the Panthers in round 18, but round 18 is the game just after State of Origin. They might they might rest a lot of their players in Penrith, and that game might not actually be as tough for the Warriors. And then you've got the Souths just after that. You've got the Rabbitohs just after that. So I think the draw for the Sharks, I prefer just a little bit compared to, say, a Nikorima. But Nikorima, I do prefer that he has got that high upside. So I really think it is a tough decision because these two are also both very similarly priced around the mid 500k mark. Personally, I think I would lean towards Shaun Johnson just because he's a bit more of that consistent option. I do really, really like that draw for the Sharks. And I don't own a Jesse Raymond, etc. So I feel like I do need to get someone from the Sharks. So I think Shaun Johnson is the guy. Whereas from the Warriors, I've got Reece Walsh at the moment. But, so that means should I get more and more Warriors players? I'm not sure. Or should I kind of diversify a little bit and go into the Cronulla Sharks? So I think Nikorima, if you really, really like your high upside, I think you could go for him. I would also note that, with Chad Townsend coming back, how does that affect his role in the team? I would expect Nikorima to still goal kick, given that I think Townsend has shown to have some deficiencies in the goal kicking so far this season, and Nikorima has been doing them pretty well. So I think Nikorima would still also hold the goal kicking. But yeah, as I mentioned, Nikorima, I think you'll get him if you want the really high upside. Sean Johnson if you want a bit more consistency in the 60s and 70s. And overall, I think I'd prefer Sean Johnson. So the next kind of topic of discussion is Tevita Pangai Jr. and whether he's a sell or a hold. Look, I think before the Nathan Cleary news, he was probably more of a sell because you wanted to kind of capitalize on that money. He's about 530k out for 3 weeks. That's quite a bit of time. But with the Nathan Cleary news and that, if you do decide to sell Cleary, you're unlocking so much money that you're able to upgrade kind of those cheaper, front row forwards or second row forwards to more of your gun players. So for me, I think, he's the second best averaging front row forward. He's shown really high upside so far this season. Even when the Broncos themselves haven't been doing so well, he still averages around the mid-60s, which I think has been rare to see so far in the front row forward. He's got dual flexibility, which I really like as well. So for me, if you've got decent coverage or are able to kind of manipulate your team to get in another front row forward and not have to sell him, I would be leaning that way. I've kind of tinkered with my trades a little bit, and I am leaning towards holding him. Just given that I don't really want to be trading him out, knowing that I might potentially want him back later in the season. And I think there's such little upside with these guys, but you have someone like a Tevita Pangai who can give high upside. If he becomes a bit of a point of difference towards the back end of the season, that could be really useful, both for overall and head-to-head purposes. So for that reason, I think if you can hold him, I think that's a great hold because I think it's really advantageous. But I do understand the motivation to sell, especially if you're going like a Tevita Pangai Jr. To like a Dave Fifita, for example. I think that kind of a trade makes sense in my opinion. Or even if you're going to like downgrade to like an Adam Fanua-Blake to create some money. But I feel like now with Nathan Cleary news, you're probably not having to create money as much of say the news before yesterday. So what I've got here is a few different options I think that might be useful to consider if you do decide to trade Tevita Pangai Jr. I've tried to focus on the round 17 playing guys, given that front row forward doesn't have that much upside. I think you're probably looking to kind of lock down someone for round 17 because guys who don't play round 17, there's probably not that many who are so much better, aside from like an Isaiah Papali'i. But I think that's a bit of a given at this point in time. If you don't have him already, he's obviously he is the best front row forward to go for. Doesn't cover round 17, but he's by far and away the best. So Luke Thompson, I've spoken about him quite a bit before in my videos as well. Been a very solid front row forward to cover round 17. As you can see there, since round 5 when he first got back in to the Bulldogs team, he's been very solid. His base plus, which is like his base and power, which includes like say tackles, runs, tackle breaks and offloads, very solid. He kind of averages around the mid-60s, which is very handy out of a front row forward, and he's priced I think at about 520k, so very similarly to Tevita Pangai Jr. In comparison, we've got Marty Tapau, who I think out of Tapau and Thompson, I would prefer as that kind of like a mid 500k front row forward. I really like Tapau, and I think he's got a bit more of that higher upside. His base plus is a little bit better in my opinion than Luke Thompson. As you can see, over the past like 5 weeks, he's got a base plus of 71, 73, 67, 66, and 69 and 70. So he's got a bit of an increase. He hasn't even got that much of an increase in minutes actually. He's been going around the mid-50s, but his output has increased quite a bit. And he's got a bit more of that attacking threat, and Manly's draw is fantastic. So, Bulldogs this week, and if you look at that run in for the rest of the season, apart from the Storm in round 21 and maybe Para in round 22, it's a pretty decent run. And for front row forwards, that's less of a concern. But with that with those easier games coming up, potentially Marty Tapau might cross over for a try, and he might give you those really high scores closer to the 100, as he did in say round 10. So I really like Tapau as a buy at 560k. I think if you're going for more of your value propositions at front row forward, the guys who have had a lot of discussion so far this week are Adam Fanua-Blake and Siosua Takeaho. So Fanua-Blake, I think, is a bit of the kind of the flavour of the week in terms of the front row forward, and that's for a few reasons, which I can completely understand. He's priced at about 418k, so he's really cheap compared to a starting price, which I think is around the mid 500s, and he's got pedigree as a good Supercoach player in the past. Definitely has high upside. He can easily score a try or double, although that goes for any of these guys, but he definitely likes to offload and tackle break. Which does help his point scoring. The only kind of concern I have about Fanua-Blake is that he has had a few injuries over the past couple of seasons. I mean, as you can see there, between round 4 and 14, he didn't play a single game. And so, before that, he was putting up decent numbers, a base plus of 65, 49, and 55 to begin the season. 32 was just the game coming back, so you can kind of understand that coming off the bench. And then last week starting again, he had a base plus of 60. So I think Fonua Blake for me there is that some risk of injury, and he's got a break even of about 66, so you don't necessarily have to get him in this week if you can avoid it. But I can understand, obviously, with 5 trades, you're looking to do as much of a cleanup of your team as you possibly can. But the price is the most enticing thing in my opinion. I mean, you compare him to say like a Luke Thompson, knowing that Fonua Blake probably has more tendency to go bigger than say a Luke Thompson, who's very much a very solid kind of mid-60s. But Fonua Blake is also getting around 60 and 65 base plus in the games that he's actually been able to get some decent minutes. And at that 418k price, that's like a 100k discount to Luke Thompson. So I think Fonua Blake to me presents much better value. So I really, really like him as a trade in target. Takiaho, even cheaper at 399k. I mean, he was very, very popular to begin the season because he had goal kicking benefit. I mean, he was one of my starting front row forwards, and obviously he's fallen off the wagon a little bit in terms of his point scoring, mainly because of that rib injury that he's picked up. He has come back and played a few more extra minutes. Obviously, last week he played 70, which is a big amount of minutes. He scored 46 points, but that did include a sin bin, so I would take that into account. If you exclude that, he would have scored around 56. His base plus was 57, and that's probably more reflective of what you're going to get out of Takiaho. So for me, he's kind of going to give you around that 55 to 60 max in base plus. He's not really known more for the base plus. It's more for the goal kicking benefit, which is why he was so popular to begin the season. He doesn't tend to offload as much or tackle break, I think, as say like a Tapau and a Fonua Blake. And for me, there's still something about his minutes. The Roosters do have a tendency to kind of rest him towards the back end of the season as they get towards finals. But in the more important games, they do tend to play him bigger minutes. As we saw, Panthers last week, he played 70 without the sin bin. Against the Storm this week, he might play some bigger minutes. And so I think he's a decent buy. But I think I would pay the extra 20k and go for it for Fonua Blake and just potentially get some higher upside, because that's something that we're really lacking in the front row forward position. So for me, if you're willing to stretch your budget a little bit further, I would go for a Tapau. If you're looking for more of a value buy, I'd go for Fonua Blake. So this next section on some cheapies, I prepared this before the Nathan Cleary news. Now I think the need for a cheapie is probably lessened, but I'll still present quite a few. I mean, Tomoko, we'll just quickly touch on him. Not an option anymore. Basically, I put a big red cross through him, so can't really consider him. Taane Milne from the Rabbitohs at 230k. He has been named again this week. There is some job security issues around him, given that he's playing on the right wing at the moment. And you've got Josh Mansour, as well as Jackson Paulo, who might potentially come back and take his place. What I do like about him is that I would think that he'll play next week as well in round 17, so he can cover that buy for you. He's very, very cheap, and he has dual flexibility. So he's a second row forward and centre wing dual listed. So if you got him and say a Ben Trbojevic, that combo of second row forward centre wings can prove really, really handy in terms of flipping around players in your team. If you've got someone like him in your second row forward, if you wanted to trade Nico Hines like a Dave Fafita, you can use someone like a Taane Milne to switch him. And so that really is a big benefit to him. So I think he is probably the best cheapie that I think I'd go for this week. But as I mentioned, I think now the need for a cheapie is probably lessened. The next guy I've got is like a Joseph Suaalii. I don't really consider him as a buy. He's one of those guys where I think if you've got it, it's like a don't buy, don't sell situation. I mean, yes, at 258k, he will cover round 17 for you most likely. With Tedesco going out for Origin, you'd expect Manu to go into fullback and then Suaalii in at centre. But he's got a break even of 43. So to be honest, coming up against Storm, there's a good chance he goes below that. And so he could actually be even cheaper next week. So I don't think there'd be any reason to bring him in for this round, in my opinion. Lastly, I've got Jackson Tapine, who will be starting for the Bulldogs, given all the outs that they've got. He's got a low break even of 5, and you know what? This is just someone that you can maybe potentially fill in for round 17. So I think if you're looking for a bit of enough, a guy that you can just have in your 25, you're not going to play for the rest of the season, who's a cheapie, you might want to go for a Jackson Tapine, but it doesn't really thrill me, to be honest. I'd probably prefer a Suaalii or a Taane Milne. One person I haven't got on this table is also, I can't remember his first name, but his surname is sorry, I probably butchered that, from the Manly Sea Eagles. He will be playing off the bench. I don't even know if he's been listed in SuperCoach at the moment. I'd expect he'd be coming in at 173k. He potentially might play next week as well, so he could be another warm body to have in round 17, and then he becomes enough for the rest of the season, and he's bottom price at 173k, so that could be another option that you go down as well. So finally, I'll just quickly touch again on that point I brought up last week about bringing in Origin guns before round 17. Just wanted to reiterate that given the Nathan Cleary news, I think a lot of it still holds true. Like for example, Tommy Turbo, I think for me, he's still a great pre-round 17 buy, purely just based on the game this week against the Bulldogs. You could go for someone else who will likely play round 16, 17 and maybe 18, whereas Tommy's more likely to play this week and then miss round 17 and then miss round 18 because that's about 2 days after the State of Origin game. But just Turbo and the fact that his ownership is so high, coming up against the Bulldogs, even if he does get a rest after an hour, by then he might have put on 150 points. Take into account captaincy, that's 300 points. Will you find someone in those 3 weeks who can score the same 300 points? It's tough to find. And his price, again, 969k I think he is. If he scores 150, his break-even's 114. He's going to go up even more. And yes, we have a lot of money if you do sell Cleary, but that doesn't mean necessarily you can just spend the money just in case you might want to bring Cleary back, I think that's probably something I should have mentioned with Nathan Cleary when I was talking about him, is that if it depends on your trade situation. If you've used basically all your trades, it will be very tough, I think, to bring him back. If you've saved a few, you might want to keep some money in the kitty, maybe like 250, 300k, just in case Cleary comes back early and you really want to jump on. You don't have to do too many trades to be able to bring him back. So for example, for that reason, I think it's still wise to be manageable with your money. Don't just splash it out on anyone. Still look for the value where you can. Dave Fafita, again, I'm leaning towards also potentially bringing him in this week as well, although I'm still very much on the fence about this. He will play this week against the Raiders and hopefully, he might do really well. He's got a break even of 132, so he could likely lose more in value. And in round 18, I think their game is 2 days after the State of Origin game 3, so it's highly likely that he misses that game, or if maybe potentially comes off the bench, plays like half an hour, and so he might not provide that many points obviously in round 18, and his price might be even cheaper in round 19, so you could wait till round 19 to get him. I don't think it's a horrible decision though to bring him in this week, purely just a game against the Raiders, a bit more of a point of difference move, and it's a good way to use one of your 5 trades, so I still advocate potentially bringing in Fafita. Harry Grant, look, he's still injured, and it's a bit of a concern because he had so many injuries so far this season. I think he's definitely looking as one of those guys I think you'd pick up in round 18 or 19. I definitely want to see him back to full fitness, or what I consider close to full fitness, before jumping on him. Tedesco, bit of an interesting proposition whether or not he's actually a season keeper towards the back end of the season. I think Tommy Turbo is a lock as one of your fullback spots, and I think the other one is really dependent on how Caitlin Ponga returns back from his injury, because the Knights draw towards the back end of the season is really, really solid. Obviously, you've got Ryan Pappenhausen coming back potentially in round 18, goal kicking as well. We saw what he did towards the beginning of the season, so I think Turbo Pappenhausen or Turbo Ponga is probably going to be the way that a lot of people will go. As I saw before with the Roosters draw, it's a bit up and down. Tedesco doesn't seem to be quite the same in terms of a SuperCoach player this season as he was in last season. So it's a bit of an interesting one whether or not you hold on to him. Look, I think if you've got him in your team at the moment, I wouldn't be selling him anytime soon, unless it's for like a Tom Tavoyevich. But yeah, Teddy, a bit of an interesting proposition and more of a discussion, I think, in the next few weeks around the fullbacks. And finally, Val Holmes, I think very much one of the best centre wing options to go for, but round 18 and 19 are against the Roosters and the Storm, and he'll be backing up from Origin, so I think for me he's a round 20 buy. So next up, well, let's just go through the vice captain and the captaincy candidates. A bit harder when we don't have Nathan Cleary to just put the captaincy on. For the first game of the round, Dragons and the Warriors, bit of a tougher game to kind of call. Potentially you can go for like a Ben Hunt or a Tohu Harris, as I've got here. I mean, Ben Hunt has shown big upside. He scored 132 last week. Warriors 5th worst at defending halfback, so Ben Hunt could be in for a big game. Similar to Tohu, I mean, I wouldn't really consider this high upside, but he scored 91, and I think he had like 75 points in base statistics, which is ridiculous. But they're potentially, he's more of a safe vice captain option, but I don't really know how many people would be going there. It's a bit tougher pickings out of that first game. We've got the Panthers and the Eels playing on Friday. Again, I don't really know how many captaincy options are in that game, given that both teams are pretty strong. We don't have Nathan Cleary, obviously, so maybe you can put a vice captaincy on like a Brian To'o, or maybe even like a Matt Burton potentially, but I think that is a big risk. And I haven't got anyone here from the Melbourne Storm or the Roosters game, just given that it's Typically the games between these two are a bit more tight, and we don't really see too many points scored, although obviously with new rules that's probably going to be a bit of a change. You maybe could go for someone there, but I don't think there's a standout out of that matchup. I think the first game really where you're going to see strong captaincy and vice captaincy options is Manly versus the Bulldogs. Do I need to say any more about this guy, Tom Trbojevic? 208 points last week, absolutely killed me watching that as a non-owner. Bulldogs have actually surprisingly not the worst team at defending fullbacks. That's the Broncos. They're the 5th worst at defending fullbacks, but they're coming up against the best fullback for Supercoach. So yeah, I think Tommy is an easy captaincy or vice captaincy, which depends on which way you want to play it, and also how easy your team is set up to do a vice captain loophole. Yeah, I just expect him to be the most highly captained player this round. Now, a bit of a punt here. I don't know, Ruben Garrick, maybe this is chasing last week's points, but he scored 156. Thankfully, I have him in my team. The Bulldogs are actually the 2nd worst at defending centre wing. So in terms of the numbers, Garrick has got maybe better potential to get points. We saw, he scored 4 tries last week. If he gets his goal kicking radar, he'd actually be more likely to be scoring around the 170. So yeah, Ruben Garrick could be a bit of a flyer if you bring him in. I also think he's a great trade and target for this week as well, given that he's highly priced. But I think if you're unlocking Nathan Cleary money, he becomes a lot more affordable in that sense. Yeah, bit of a fun one here, but I think if you've got Tommy Turbo, you're probably going to be leaning towards him. In terms of captaincy options for later in the week, we've got Dave Fifita coming up against the Raiders. One reason why I'm potentially looking at bringing him in early this week is that the Raiders are the 2nd worst at defending edge back rollers. He only scored 47 last week, but that was last round, should I say. But that was coming up against the Roosters, and he was backing up from State of Origin, and he was coming off the bench. So I think there were some factors in play as to why he scored 47. I think, a full week of prep, under his belt, hopefully you should see Fifita back to his best and, breaking tackles for fun, maybe crossing over for a try or two. And so I think he could be a bit of a sneaky captaincy option if you put a vice captaincy on Tommy Turbo. Later on, we've got Sean Johnson against the Broncos. I mean, the Broncos have been the 7th worst at defending halfbacks, so they're kind of middle of the road. For me, Sean Johnson, I think it's more based on the matchup. I think he himself, I don't see him going super, super high. I mean, maybe you can see like an 80-90 score from him, but I don't quite see him having the same upside as like a Tom Turbo or even a Fifita, I think. So this is more of a safe captain option, but I'm not sure if I'd lean there myself. I think one way that a lot of players are going to be leaning is Cody Walker on Sunday against the Tigers. Tigers are the worst team at defending 5/8, so that's one thing in itself. Cody Walker coming off 110, so his first ton of the season. Potentially he might go back-to-back. He's got his full contingent back in terms of Latrell, Adam Reynolds, Dan Gagai, Alex Johnson, etc. And we saw how deadly their left edge was against the Broncos last round, and against the Tigers, who just leaked 66 points. I expect better effort out of the Tigers this week, but Cody Walker could be a very good captaincy option as well on Sunday. So I think a lot of people are going to be playing it. Maybe Tom Trbojevic, vice captain on Saturday, captain Walker on Sunday. But I realistically think most people are going to be going captaincy Tommy Turbo, and maybe just vice captain, maybe like a Nico Hines against the Roosters. So we'll just go through the break-evens. We won't go through too many in detail. I think now it seems that with Nathan Cleary money, we've got all the money in the world, so break-evens don't matter so much. To be honest, out of the Broncos, I don't know who you'd be looking to buy in. I've seen a few people potentially looking at like a Katoni Staggs. He doesn't even come up on the list here because he hasn't played a game yet so far this season. I wouldn't be leaning there myself. Actually, I probably will give a bit of a shout out to Payne Haas as well, who's so cheap now. 470k with a break even of 63. That might be the cheapest you will ever see Payne Haas for the rest of Supercoach. But to be honest, I think his scores haven't been amazing so far. He's playing State of Origin as well, so that might be impacting his performance to an extent. Doesn't cover round 17, so to be honest, I think Haas, if you've got him, you don't sell him, but I wouldn't be going out and buying him. Matt Lodge, similar. I mean, he's been doing very, very well recently at 484k with the lowish break even at 41. He's been doing super well, but again, one of those guys I wouldn't actively be looking to bring in when I think you've got cheaper options like Fanua Blake, who will cover round 17. Out of the Bulldogs, as mentioned, Jackson Tapine with a 5 break even is probably your best investment outside of a Luke Thompson, but yeah, not too much to speak of here. Raiders, we've got Tomoko with a minus 43 break even, but red line through him, we're not going to be able to get him. I mean, Bailey Simonson, he'll cover round 17 at 385k, negative 11 break even. I just don't think I could go there myself, to be honest. I've sold him. I don't want to really bring him back so far. But yeah, Corey Harry-Onaira is probably someone as well. He's been discussed quite a bit in the past few weeks. I don't have him in the team, and he's definitely still a target of mine at 524k. I mean, he's kind of lost that value, magic that he had about him when he was like 350, 400k. But I think he's still been averaging keeper numbers around 64. And with a break even of 61, probably not going to go up too much in price, but still, I think a really, really great purchase for round 17 coverage. Out of the Dragons, to be honest, I don't think there's too many players I'm going to be interested in that they don't cover round 17. I mean, Ben Hunt is probably your best option with that high upside, maybe at hooker, but yeah, to be honest, not really too much interested for me at the Dragons. Next up, out of the Sea Eagles, so Kieran Foran is actually the best break-even player at the Sea Eagles with a -36 break-even. He's been listed at 5'8" in hooker. So potentially if you're looking to maybe, I don't know, if you're downgrading like a Connor Watson to a Kieran Foran, I just don't know whether I'd be doing it myself. I mean, he has had 2 good scores in the past fortnight. Yeah, I just don't know if I'd be going there myself, to be honest. It just doesn't sit right with me. Daly Cherry Evans, probably have someone I didn't mention enough in the halfback section. I think he could be a really, really good point of difference halfback for the back end of the season. As we saw, Manly's draw is very, very good. And he's had some really, really big games in the past couple of weeks. He had like 148 recently. And with Tommy Turbo and the teams, there's plenty of opportunities for the Sea Eagles to get a lot of tries. And, Cherry Evans obviously is a big part of that as well. So I really like him actually as a point of difference. But he won't cover round 17 because of State of Origin. So that is a bit of a black mark against him. As I mentioned, Tom Trbojevic, 115 break even. To be honest, he's averaging more than his break even of 115. So again, it looks like there's no better time, I think, to bring him in. I mean, the best time was way back when he was 590k, but let's not talk about that. Brush that under the carpet. Yeah, so I still think that Tom Trbojevic is a good trade and target. And to be honest, not much more, I think, to discuss. I mean, you've got Ruben Garrick, with the 11 break even at 728k. I think if you want to get him in, this is the best way to do it. He's going to go up even more in price with that 156 in his rolling average for the next fortnight. And really, really nice games coming up for the Sea Eagles. I think Garrick is looking like a gun centre wing to finish for the rest of the season. So I think he's definitely a good keeper to bring in. From the Storm, I think the main guys I mentioned is Jerome Hughes. We've already discussed him. Brandon Smith as well with a break even of 83. Look, Brandon Smith has been killing it so far towards the last kind of 4 to 6 weeks. I don't know if I'd be buying that myself. 645k is a lot of money, but I think he's one of those guys, if you've got him, you'd be stoked with him in your team. And so congrats to any owners. I wish I went there myself as well. But yeah, he's been doing amazing. I think the 2 main guys that everyone is waiting for are right down the bottom of that list there. Nico Hines and Ryan Pappenhausen, break-evens of 137 and 202 respectively. There is potentially some discussion about, should you sell Nico Hines this week? For me, he was probably going to be a sell for me without the Nathan Cleary news, because I did need to create some cash and I kind of wanted to capitalize on his price. But I've been thinking about it a bit more. And I think with Hines, he's guaranteed to still play this round, and there's no guarantee that Pappenhausen will be back for round 18. That's just what we've heard. Potentially, I don't know, he might, there might be some lingering symptom, and then it pushes out to round 19, round 20, for example. At that point in time, you might have traded out Hines already, but then there's another week or 2 that he still gets really, really good points in your center wing. So for me, I think I'm still leaning towards, I only want to sell Hines when we know that Pappenhausen is back in the team. But for me, Hines is my kind of ticket to day Fafita. So I don't think that's actually going to be too bad with Fafita hopefully going down a bit more in price. Nico Hines will probably go down a little bit more, but I still think I'll be able to make that trade work. So for me, Hines for me personally is still a hold, just given the Nathan Cleary stuff, and I'm probably going to sell him. I'll have a lot of money to play with, so I don't really have to trade out Nico Hines. Out of the Knights, I think there's not too many players of interest here. I mean, you've got Mitch Barnett. He's actually been named on an edge this week, which is really, really good to see. So definitely, I think if you still got him, you definitely hold him. And I think I'm actually comfortable in playing him this week as well. And Kalen Ponga is the main guy to look out for. I mean, a 610 break even at 686k. As I mentioned, the Knights draw towards the back end of the season is fantastic. I think they've got 2 games against the Broncos, so for a fullback like Ponga, that's exactly what you want to see. So definitely one to keep an eye on. I definitely do want to see him, though, playing a little bit more out of his injuries, as he's had a very, very injury-riddled season. Out of the Cowboys, Taumalolo is someone I think people might be thinking about. He's so cheap now at 475k. I'm not interested, to be honest. I mean, Todd Payton is actually isolating for the next fortnight. Maybe the interim coach comes in and actually plays Taumalolo bigger minutes. Maybe Taumalolo does well. But for me, I just can't be going towards Taumalolo. He hasn't done anything to encourage me so far this season. And Val Holmes is the main guy. I think 134 break even, 647k. I think hopefully he goes under that, well under that as a non-owner, and comes nice and cheap, and we can pick him up in round 20. Next up, out of the Eels, not too many players, I think. Again, I mean, Ryan Madison is someone a lot of people have been thinking about selling. 96 break even at 510k. I can understand it. He's had some poor scores in the past fortnight, but I think he provides good depth as second row forward. And so I think unless you're trading him to, like, say, a Fafita, I don't know if I would be trading him to anyone else, to be honest. I think I probably would just stick him and maybe not play him, because, you know, in the bigger games, he is maybe more likely to play 80 minutes. And then that's obviously what you want him for as a keeper. Clint Gutherson actually is very, very interesting at 86 break even at 730k. To be honest, if I need to get Tom Trbojevic this week, Gutherson's the one who's going to make way, which is a bit of a shame because Gutherson, you know, he's obviously got a tough game against the Panthers this week. He's done very, very well. He won't play round 17, but round 18 is versus the Titans. So that is throwing a bit of a spanner in the works because I'd expect Trbojevic to not play in round 18, and Gutherson against the Titans could easily crack a ton. So that is a bit of a thing I'm thinking about. To be honest, I'd probably actually rather trade Hines compared to, say, a Gutherson, but just with Hines in my center wing, I don't have the right duels to make it work to get in Tommy. So yeah, Gutherson might have to make way for me this week. It is hard because, like, he has done very, very well, but I think it's a necessary sacrifice for Tom Trbojevic. Out of the Panthers, as I mentioned, Cleary is the hot topic of discussion. I mean, you've got Jerome Luai there. 398k is so cheap for him, with their break even of 88. I think he could be a very, very interesting pickup. Cleary is out for an extended period of time. Luai will take more control of the team, and that might do really well for his scoring. Matt Burton, we haven't really spoken about him as a... I don't know if I would actually consider him as a trade-in, because I think a lot of people would be looking to get, like, your Nicarima, your Sean Johnson, guys who cover round 17. I have Matt Burton, and I'm very, very happy that I've still held him till this point in time, because now that he's playing as the dominant 5'8", and I think Luai has been named at halfback, we might see some really good scores out of Matt Burton. So I think he's a very, very good hold and a good play in your 17 as well. Out of the Sharks, I think we've spoken about the main guys. I mean, Jesse Ramian is a great round 17 playing centre. I mean, I think he scored 50 points last week and didn't score a try. He's just got that really, really solid base and good tackle breaking ability, which gives him a very, very nice floor and a very good draw coming up for the Sharks as well. And against the Broncos, could be fantastic. I mean, Ronaldo Mulatalo is also a guy that, I don't know whether he will play game 3. I mean, there's all that hubbub around him not being able to play in game 2 for Queensland. We'll see if he gets to play for them in game 3. But if he did, he wouldn't actually be available for round 17. But he could be an interesting point of difference as well, as a really high upside try scoring winger, with that good draw for the Sharks coming up. Out of the Rabbitohs, I mean, Dan Gaggai's got a very, very nice break even of -45 and is still at a decent price of 585k. Won't cover round 17, but the Rabbitohs draw beyond that is very, very nice. So I think Gaggai is actually a very, very good point of difference centre wing to go for as well. If you haven't, say, got on like an Alex Johnston, you could go for a Gaggai instead, as he is a little bit cheaper than a Johnston. One final guy I will talk about out of the Rabbitohs is Cam Murray. He's actually been doing so well instead of Origin. I'm actually so impressed by him. And at 492k with a break even of 56, this could be the cheapest that we see him. And I think he could be getting back towards that SuperCoach gun status that he had, towards periods of last season. Towards the beginning of the season, he hasn't been doing that well, but he could be a very good like value option to pick up after round 17 to add some depth in your second row forward. Out of the Roosters, I think we've already discussed the main guys like your Sam Walkers and your Tedescos, etc. So I don't really think there's too much to discuss. I mean, your Daniel Tupou, probably a very, very nice pickup next week in round 17, given that he's got a really high break-even of 111 and coming up against the Storm. But round 17, coming up against the Bulldogs, he'll be nice and cheap. Fantastic trade and target for next week, in my opinion. And apart from that, maybe Sam Verrills could be a cheap hooker to play in round 17. I think he's coming off the bench. I can't quite remember off the team list, my apologies. But 247k could be a very nice value proposition there. Out of the Titans, to be honest, Fafita is the only one I'm interested in. 132 break even. So hopefully, I haven't decided if I will bring him in this week. But hopefully, if I don't, he goes down in price and doesn't score that well for me. Out of the Warriors, again, a lot of players that we've spoken about already. I mean, Tohu Harris is a lock, in my opinion, in most round 17 playing teams and is a keeper for the rest of the season. Probably is the second or third best second row forward behind Dave Fafita, along with Angus Crichton, in my opinion. So I think if you haven't got Tohu already, he would be a definite priority in this 5-trade round. And apart from that, no one else really stands out, in my opinion. You've got Nicarima, obviously. Reece Walsh was the guy who I brought in. He's now got a break even of 98. So yeah, that hasn't been a great trade-in for me. And finally, out of the Tigers, I mean, the most appealing guy is probably like maybe a Dave Nofoaluma. He's got a break even of 84 at 406k. He could be super cheap for the run home for the rest of the season. I think the Tigers draw from round 20 or 21 is very nice. I think they've got a couple of games against the Bulldogs towards the back end of the season. So I think Nofoaluma could be definitely someone to keep an eye on as a very cheap, former gun, a bit of a fallen gun actually for this season, as someone you can plug into center wing. I've still got Nofoaluma in my team, and I think I'll be holding him for that period of time, and that obviously goes for a lot of these other Tigers players like your Adam Deweys, your Dan Laurie's, etc. So we'll quickly touch on our group league. We have Andrew from Eliminators. I think he's a bit of a new entry, but yeah, look at that overall rank. He's 6th in the overall comp for SuperCoach, so he's doing amazing. And he scored 1,829 in round 15. Sorry, that should say, not round 14. So yeah, absolutely ridiculous round. Can I please steal some of those points, Andrew? That'd be really appreciated. Because yeah, I needed some of those badly last round. And without a doubt, at 6th overall rank, he's also topping our overall group top 5, and followed by Perpetual Motion, James, Samuel, James, and Jason, who are all doing really well themselves, all in the top 350 overall. But yeah, Andrew, welcome to the group. I haven't seen your name before, and yeah, coming in at 6th is ridiculous, and 1,829 last round is fantastic. So hopefully you keep it up and can go for the first place position. If you guys want to join the group, the code is 286239. Well guys, that is wrapping up the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. A lot of big topics to go through, obviously in Super Trade round, so the video might be a little bit longer, but hopefully you guys sit back and relax and enjoyed it. If you did, would really appreciate a thumbs up on the video, and do please consider subscribing to the channel as well if you haven't, as I put more videos out throughout the 2021 SuperCoach season. But until then, good luck for round 16, and see you guys in the next video.